Hey there, everybody, and welcome to my slideshow presentation on how to stop making the worst accessibility gamer-ass takes I've ever heard in my life. I can't say the F word. I can't say the F word. I gotta wait at least 30 seconds before I can say the F word. That's how you make me feel with your really bad takes. They're really, let me see, donkey doo-doo. Yeah, let's go with that. We'll talk about why your takes are wrong and to better understand the problems with accessibility implementation from somebody who is not a professional gaming accessibility, person, but is, an advocate for gaming accessibility. I would say more from an indie perspective and, is kind of more just like on and off with it, not somebody who is in the professional sphere. So, what is accessibility? Accessibility is a set of design practices that make your software or hardware more usable for disabled people. So, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. It can range from just having a more customizable user interface that allows you to have larger text or higher contrast. It can be having high contrast themes. It can be, paying special attention to colorblind, interfaces, so that way you don't just, have issues with, colorblind ambiguity. It can involve, transforming, say, visual or audio cues into another form so that people can have multiple ways of understanding certain, outputs. It can also involve, different kinds of hardware inputs as well. So, for example, specialized, hardware devices can be created that are specifically accommodated for disabled input. So there's a lot of things that can happen that can be used to make something more accessible for a user in a hardware or software setting. Accessibility started as a political movement in the 1960s and 1970s to promote better architectural access. Now, there are movements before and after this period of time that, had developments in accessibility, such as the development of white canes and Braille and things like that. But in the 1960s and 1970s, there was a political movement that was evolving around the concept of something called the social model of disability. The idea behind the social model of disability is that instead of a disability being necessarily an individual medical condition that needs to be corrected, there are social changes that we can make to make life easier for disabled people. It's really important because we can't actually cure a lot of disabled people, and a lot of disabled people also don't want to be cured. And imagine if somebody was telling you how to change your entire lived body experience because they didn't want to build you a ramp. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of rude. That was basically the philosophy behind the social model of disability. Accessibility continued into the era of computer technology, with the development of assistive tools such as screen readers, magnifiers, and special UI customization features. Despite many advances in the field, there are still many difficult problems to solve in accessibility. Actual challenges in implementing accessibility in video games. So there's actually a lot of things that are getting in the way of people implementing accessibility in video games, and I think it's really important for people to understand the topology of the problem. So first, there is a lack of developer interest. We are asking developers to add essentially, more development, and, to be blunt, it is more development. It is not something that can be plugged and played. It requires, quite a bit of investment of development time, especially if the software is already developed and already has an internal structure. It takes time to do that, so you do have to convince a developer that it is a worthwhile interest, and this can seem like it's not when it's only a few people at first glance that would benefit from it. I would argue to these developers that not only is there, useful curb cutting effects, which is referring to the fact that sometimes accessibility features also have benefits for a wider audience that are not necessarily disabled, but that, accessibility can also be seen as an interesting challenge for a user interface. It can be seen as something to develop your artistic vision. Wouldn't it be cool that using, blind accessibility interfaces, that you could design parts of your game that, may need actual navigation from those kinds of tools in one way or another? Or perhaps it's part of your vision to be able to see blind people to play a game that sighted people can play. So, all in all, there are reasons to explore accessibility, but it may not be apparent to some developers, especially developers who are building games who are thinking, oh, well, why would a disabled person even try to play this, right? There's also issues within and outside of the accessibility community regarding representation and stereotyping. Despite the persistence of the phrase, not us without us, which is a common and popular disability phrase, meaning that you need to involve disabled people in your discourses, there are still problems with representation. I would say that there is maybe too much representation from people who are not disabled. I feel like disabled people should really be running the show in pretty much every instance. And also, I feel that there is problems with understanding, highly stigmatized disorders, especially those within mental illness. The professional gaming accessibility community has a history of, demonstrating that they cannot be really trusted with handling disabilities related to mental issues. And I will get into a little bit of that in this video, but it does go quite a bit deeper than what I do talk about in this presentation. So there are significant problems with stereotyping and representation. It's challenging to develop. These are in many cases unexplored problems. When people say, how do you make that game blind accessible? It's a good question. When they genuinely mean it, it is a challenge, right? And as a result, you may not have the resources or the energy or the interest to be able to develop that challenge. Now, personally, I think that, that achieving blind accessibility in games that we thought was not possible is a truly incredible achievement. But, I understand why an individual developer may not want to, pursue that for one reason or another. Lack of good tutorials. There's not really that much to work with online. It's not explained very well outside of some disabled resources that people produce that do provide useful input about what may or may not be an issue for them in their games. There are a few professional resources that include, there's a lot of good advice on physical disabilities, on how to develop, what you should try to develop in your game. I would be a bit more cautious with the mental disabilities. I think I would wait for a more diverse group of opinions to come out on that before we really start saying, hey, this is how we should develop games for mentally ill and disabled people. There's just not a lot of tutorials on how to implement any of that, and that can be extremely intimidating and overwhelming to people. There really should be more tutorials. There's concerns with just labor in general, who's gonna work on it? How am I gonna pay for a consultant to test things? How am I gonna be able to reasonably test this? I will say to indie developers that generally I think that people, I don't speak for everyone, but I generally think that for a small indie project, people are generally okay with giving, feedback from playtesting and things like that. And that is incredibly valuable. But I think that if you are, a large budget studio, you are under obligation to at least, give some compensation. I understand that in some circumstances it may be extremely hard to convince people to do that, but I think that providing at least some compensation for the feedback for consulting work for a large studio is necessary. Licensing and free software use concerns. So there are some concerns with some people who are very specific into interests about free software and ownership rights over what parts of the software they have rights to produce, things like that. And, there are some concerns that having privatized models of accessibility within certain game engines that are more competitive than others may impact issues within the free software movement and game development. But the biggest issue is, are you ready for it? Propaganda. You are not immune to propaganda. Why do people complain about accessibility being in video games? Accessibility is seen as a threat to a challenging or exciting gameplay experience. Accessibility is seen as a threat to artistic choice and design. Accessibility is thought to interfere with intentionally masochistic design. And accessibility is seen as a potential threat to freedom. These things don't seem to relate to the other issues of implementing accessibility. There's no concern for the developer's needs when implementing accessibility, like, providing more resources or, creating new ways of approaching the problem. There's no discourse on that. There's no interest in useful compromise or discussion. It's not like these people are trying to find a solution that is helpful for disabled people and developers. Focus is on what a subset of gamers find important. Specifically a subset. Only some gamers seem to be concerned about this. Seems strange, isn't it? It's history time. Let's talk about Sekiro. Great. Sekiro made a game. Sorry, I said Sekiro. I meant From Software made a game called Sekiro that was seen as too difficult by gaming accessibility advocates, such as Cherry Thompson and Able Gamers. So basically, Sekiro was this, game that advertised itself as being hard as balls, and you had to be, super, super tough to get through it. And disabled advocates were like, whoa, hold up, this is too hard for me, this is too hard. These groups argued that a game's difficulty is a part of accessibility. So basically they were saying, hey, it's not fair that this game is really, really hard. You should make it easier to play because then it will be more accessible to people like me, such as people with disabilities. This resulted in a discourse that shaped the public's view on gaming accessibility today. Before Sekiro, and a couple other incidents like the Cuphead thing, but I didn't want to go into super crazy detail about the Cuphead thing. Gamergate also had a bit of an influence, but basically before Sekiro really crystallized this opinion, gaming accessibility was often seen as an exciting challenge. For example, blindfold speedruns started with blind people being instructed how to play through the game. In the 2000s, some incredible accomplishments were made by blind and other disabled people. And these were accomplishments that were supported by the community. Able Gamers, if I recall correctly, was started as part of the fighting game community. So gamers did at one point think that accessibility was actually cool. Afterward, though, accessibility was seen as a threat, and this problem was accelerated by right-wing commentators, aka grifting pieces of shit. Let's discuss why both sides of this issue were wrong. Why Cherry Thompson's article is wrong. Presenting difficulty as an accessibility issue has serious implications for disability politics. It reinforces ableist ideas of what a disabled person can do by implying that we can't do difficult things by the language that you're using to describe the problem. and it focuses more on contentious elements of the game instead of fixing serious and obvious failures that impact many people. So, for example, there's a lot of UI things that From Software just does in general that is not very, like, nice to people who are, may have, like, reading disabilities. For example, having, like, the particular text and font and just the way they design their UI in general is very unfriendly, right? And these are things that I think that if they were designed just very, very slightly differently would be much more of a positive experience than just focusing on the difficulty, because I think the difficulty of the game is 100% intentional. They are making the game hard because they are weeding out the people who cannot finish the game. That's the idea. It's okay for games to be too hard. Games can also be enjoyed as videos or live streams, right? Like, I don't even play a lot of video games. I actually watch them because I just can't, like, afford them, and I don't like to pirate indie games, right? I don't feel like that's right. So, I don't go out of my way to play a lot of games, except for games that I know that I can enjoy and are not going to be a problem for me. So it's okay for games to be hard, right? Difficulty may not even resolve any of the identified accessibility problems. Quite honestly, it may not even be the difficulty that is really the core issue. It may be something inherent to the way that they've designed the game. A more thorough UI analysis is really needed. Accessibility isn't about everyone being able to play your game, it's about overcoming unnecessary barriers. The difference between, implementing a whole difficulty mode, right, for a game that's intentionally extremely difficult and, like, improving accessibility is that accessibility is about making the gameplay experience better, right? Now, there is a lot of issues I had with this article. It's very complicated. One day I might go over it, but just be aware that while I disagree with a lot of her opinions on these things, I do think that they come from a very real place that makes a lot of sense, and she just doesn't have a full understanding of, I think, like, the problems at play here, because she's just thinking, like, I can't play it. It's obviously it's because it's too hard, it's too much for me, right? But it's more likely than not that it's a combination of the game being extremely difficult and also other accessibility issues. Why From Software fans are wrong. The choice to not include accessibility is likely not artistic. Like, let's get real. They're not doing it because of artistic vision. It's most likely budgetary, they're too inexperienced, or their code doesn't really support those changes very easily. The implementation of optional accessibility would likely not interfere with the game's main vision. I think people who say this just genuinely don't understand what accessibility is, and because of this particular incident, they think that accessibility has something to do with difficulty, when in reality it has to do with, I can't read the fucking text on the screen, you asshole. From Software would likely benefit from a difficulty modes regardless. Like, having difficulty modes in your user game experience gives you more opportunities to explore the potentials of your game. I think the most valuable use case for difficulty modes is to allow players to learn the game and become comfortable enough in the game to actually take on these hardcore challenges. I think that Sekiro's design principle is inherently flawed because it's going to weed out most of the people who would rather just have a more, like a more friendly experience of training for the game. Like, you're supposed to be playing as these warriors and shit, and you're telling me that I'm supposed to just figure this shit out extremely quickly and then just go and do this stuff? No, I think warriors in real life would have training. So I think that having these difficulty modes offers a means to have that training in one way or another. Maybe it interferes with it because it means that you're going to see these boss characters like way before you're going to see these boss characters in an easier format, so you're going to know how to battle them, but this can easily be avoided by just having having most of the hard bosses locked in the hard mode. Why not make the game just have an extremely hard mode that is just notorious for being super hard? I mean, I know that Nightmare is a joke in Doom technically, but like, it's also known for being really hard, and people will go and try to do like runs of it to show their shit. So why does Sekiro think it's better than that? You know, in my opinion, I think the real reason why Sekiro is saying this is because I think that the developers from Software, you know, may have issues with their input-output stack. Maybe they didn't abstract the inputs properly, and they're basically pulling in, you know, in the idle cycle or something in places that are really just not appropriate. It is, I don't know what it's like in the professional gaming industry. Maybe they have better programming standards. I will admit I didn't go and use like that fucking like program to disassemble the game. I'm not like that interested in figuring this out, but like I do know for a matter of fact indie games have some of the worst code I've ever seen in my life, and it is not exclusive to Yandere Dev. In fact, what's weird is that a lot of indie game developers will make the same exact mistakes as Yandere Dev, and the reality is that I don't really care how good or bad of a developer you are, but you know, let's get real, they're probably saying this because they can't implement a different difficulty. They probably hard-coded a lot of that, and they're probably just, yeah, it's probably a consequence of their project development. And let's get real, it would be so fucking cool if it was more accessible. Can you imagine all these kick-ass disabled players just kicking this game's ass? Multiple disabled players demonstrated at the time that defeating Sekiro was possible, but some of them, again, did wish for better accessibility options, because it just makes it a more streamlined experience. It is not making it easier, it's making it easier to engage with. Let's go over those four garbage takes. Accessibility will make my gameplay suck. Games won't be fun anymore. Games must be stupid and slow to be accessible. Complaints of games are being too obvious. Why this take sucks. Accessibility features are typically optional. Nobody's telling you that you have to play the game with the screen reader on or with massive text. It's literally an option. I don't understand people who say this. Good accessibility will not interfere with the speed of the game. Disabled people also want a challenge. Again, difficulty is not really an accessibility question. I understand that professional people said that, but professional people were fucking wrong, and they had horrible consequences for the discourse. So, yeah. Accessible. The stereotype that accessible equals easy is really harmful, honestly. Almost all accessibility requests are for improved UI features, input-output options, and gameplay integration with a disability, not difficulty. It gets in the way of implementing more necessary accessibility with harmful stereotypes. People seriously think that we are asking for stupid games. That's not what we're fucking asking for. Some people just aren't good at video games, and that's okay. Now, there are some real concerns that are similar to this complaint. Gaming accessibility standards in mental health care are developing and need improvement. It's evolving rather quickly because of addictive gambling interfaces, so there's more than just these gaming accessibility people who are researching it now, and stereotypes and representations still remain issues both in like what game developers are producing and the discourse surrounding their accessibility. Misconceptions about accessibility and difficulty. Thanks to this whole Sekiro incident, people think that accessibility and difficulty are interchangeable, and it is not. They were wrong. They were wrong, and they have to just admit that they were wrong. I'm so tired of hearing this. Accessibility development does take time and resources from other possible types of development. So it can be too, costly for many, especially many smaller developers, to put to put accessibility in their interfaces after they've completed a game. That's actually quite difficult. Bad implementation could interfere with main modes of play. So if you basically write a bunch of noodle code to try to also add accessibility, this could make your gameplay experience worse. And so, again, this would be benefited from things like better tutorials, better assets, things like that. Garbage take number 2. Accessibility is a threat to art design. Having to change options for theme changes, color changes, and other features could interfere with the game's art direction. Why this take sucks. Accessibility features are optional. Again, you don't have to have them. The way I usually see it is that the artistic vision should just be the default state, and then you can modify it. Accessible interfaces are more helpful than just for disabled users, an effect called curb cutting. So, for example, having highly customizable user interfaces allows anyone to make the user interface more comfortable for them for whatever reason. They don't have to be disabled. Implementing accessible design early in your UI encourages more well-designed internal components. Yeah, this is something that people don't want to hear, but again, game developers are really not very good at developing, right? But having certain kinds of design principles, such as, making your user interfaces accessible by default and figuring out those problems, will encourage you to have a more robust design of your internal components, and it will make it easier for you down the line. I am telling you right now, I know some people just love to just ignore user interface, but seriously, don't ignore a user interface. You can, make your game a way better experience, both in terms of your gameplay experience and your programming experience, by actually taking the time to develop a proper user interface engine. And one of the best ways to do that is to implement accessibility while you're doing it, because it requires conscious thought about what your UI elements are doing. Accessibility can contribute positively towards art direction. It can literally make your user interface more friendly to use. What is there to say? Serious artists may even see it as a challenge. The art excuse is rarely made by artists, and that's just what I've observed. It's usually made by people who are making excuses. Actual conflict cases are rare and highly specialized. These usually have to do with art that has strobing lights and things like that, and those are a special exception. Typically, those are managed by simply telling the player before they purchase the game that it has photosensitivity issues. So if you do have a game or product that has a lot of lights, please warn your consumers before they buy it, because it's a real dick move to take their money only for them to discover later that they can't fucking play it or use it. Similar real concerns. Again, strobe lighting, high motion, accessible interface implementation could interfere with art direction. Maybe you want to have a fucking vomit blur fest for your game. I can't play that, but at least tell me. Be transparent about your accessibility limitations of your game, especially if there's something super obvious. I don't expect you to catch everything, but at least tell people if your game has excessive motion blur or all these stupid shaders or things like that. I literally cannot look at footage of these games for more than a few seconds. It can literally make me sick while I'm video editing. It's really bad. Please don't fucking do it. Always add flashing light warnings, since these can seriously hurt people. You don't want to fucking hurt your audience. That's a huge liability. Garbage take number 3. I can't believe I have to say this. Accessibility interferes with me wanting to hurt the player intentionally. What if the developer's intent is to truly make them suffer? Why this take sucks. Usually the developer does not actually want to injure the player. Usually they want to punish them with a challenge or something really hard that they can't get past, and they want to frustrate them. They want to make it so that they can't reach the ending. That's why the Sans Undertale battle is so hard. It's not that he's trying to literally hurt you. He's trying to hurt your character by producing a challenge that is almost impossible to get past. Hurting the player will cause the player to stop playing. What need I say more? Why would I play something that's fucking actively hurting me unless I am literally like masochistic? Okay. And it will lead to reputational damage, especially if you do not alert people that you are hurting people. So a famous example of this is that in the late 90s, Nintendo released the first Mario Party, and they did not anticipate users using the palm of their hand to get through mini games and get a higher score, which resulted in a lot of people getting injuries. Nintendo did not want to injure those people. They did not anticipate that people would use that way. And so what they had to do as a result is they had to release this glove that they could use to protect your hand while playing the game upon proof of purchase. I think there was maybe a lawsuit involved in it. It probably was a lawsuit considering how Nintendo acts about these things in general. But, yeah, so basically Nintendo made a game that accidentally hurt a bunch of people, and they had to do a bunch of crap in order to say, hey, stop hurting yourselves. It's not the player's fault. It's your fault. And it's a huge fucking deal. Don't do it. Real similar concerns. Now, this I am actually taking seriously, because I do believe that games have a wide range of possible expression, and I think it's important to, not just say we cannot develop certain kinds of games. Masochism in video games should be allowed, but to what extent? You should really consider the potential health of the player. Do you really want to injure someone? Like, you need to think about this like a machine, right? This is a machine that you are literally distributing on the internet that plugs into your computer and makes it do things, right? That is a real thing with real consequences. Do you want to be on the receiving end of potentially hurting somebody because you made a user interface choice that was dangerous, right? And likewise, do you want to be on the receiving end of the social consequences of making an extremely unfriendly user interface? I mean, even if From Software thought they were the shit for making, their games super tough and hard, they still had a PR disaster on their hands when they had to deal with that shit, and I don't think they handled it very well either. Intentionally interfering with usability may just cause more players to quit than just those who need accessibility. Like, you're interfering with your ability to make the game enjoyable and, interactable. You're basically making the surface between the game and your players more and more uncomfortable, right? And I get it. Like, maybe you're doing this for some avant-garde reason. You're saying some kind of deep thing about the nature of art and mass production and consumption or whatever. But you should probably maybe think about also the consequences of making a game so uncomfortable to people. You may not even, get your point across because people are not playing your game. You might want to consider alternative approaches to masochism in your game. I think one of the most genius examples is the game Desert Bus. Yeah, have you ever heard of Desert Bus? I'm sure you have, actually. It's pretty famous. So Desert Bus is basically just a game where you have to drive under the speed limit on a bus that veers slightly to the right and essentially stay on course for 8 hours straight with no pause button, no nothing, right? It is intentionally designed to be an extremely masochistic experience that at the end of it, you get awarded 1 point. Yeah. So basically, the joke is that this is supposed to be the most intentionally uncomfortable game that you could make without basically hurting somebody. And because this is, actually a really compelling, situation where it's not really the interface that is making you suffer, it's the game that's making you suffer, there is literally charities that are formed around completing this challenge, right? People actually donate money to charity to watch these guys, like, drive this stupid bus for 8 hours, right? And it's because the experience is compelling enough to keep you playing. And you should really consider that if you are going for a masochistic game design. Garbage take number 4. Accessibility could be a threat to my own freedom of software development. Accessibility could put forward barriers that could prevent future software development choices in the future. Why this take is, well, it's complicated. So I want to first say that most of the people who are saying this are probably just paranoid and don't understand what the situation is, but it is more complicated than just like, no, you're just being crazy. See, there are complicated conflicts surrounding responsibility for accessibility. So we have to ask ourselves, like, who should be the one really rolling out accessibility? Should it be the operating system? Should it be the game engine? Should it be the developers? There's advantages and disadvantages to every layer of this particular question. So, for example, if we have engines having accessibility, this may lead to unfair market advantages in various game engines. So, for example, if one game engine invests a lot into accessibility and then an open source engine, which just simply does not have the resources to hire a bunch of consultants and stuff, may have a poorer model of accessibility, this may lead to unfair market advantages, especially if these market advantages end up being enforced by legal enforcement, right? It also has a conflict for open source and right to repair. Like, basically, when we put all of these powers and responsibilities in the software itself, it also basically gives the developer the excuse that, oh, well, I did achieve the requirements and I can do whatever else I want. This is why a lot of accessible design is going in this direction where, oh, we met the expectations, but we should, we want to put actual customization behind a paywall because people will pay for that. I think that's really scummy. And I think that's really shit, and I think that's an example of using accessibility features as a way to, putting basically real accessibility behind a paywall and giving us the, oh, well, we checked the checkbox accessibility otherwise. And that really frustrates me. I think the biggest example I can think of on the top of my head is Discord, but there's plenty of other examples. When you put accessibility on the developer, there's a larger possibility of failure. They might forget something, they may not take it seriously, they may not appreciate it. There's less resources available because developers typically do not have the same amount of resources as a large game engine development project. Even a project like Godot has more resources than the average developer. And there's more developer responsibility. Like, you have to take care of more things. You have to manage this engine in a more complicated manner. Real concerns. Questions of who owns the rights and access to code that enables accessibility and accessibility models in games. Like, we should really be asking ourselves the question of what it means to have accessibility and accessibility models privatized. We could analyze, for example, the development of something like Freedom Scientific's JAWS, which is a screen reader introduced in the 90s that is a closed source screen reader, in comparison to NVDA, non-visual desktop aid, I think it's called. That is an open source screen reader that started development in the 2000s, and both of these are highly popular. NVDA is actually the most popular screen reader in Windows. But yeah, it would be very useful to analyze and contrast the differences in, how having closed source accessibility versus open source accessibility, impacts things. What does it mean when, for example, Apple invests tons and tons of money into research and development for accessibility and integrates it highly into their operating system, but doesn't reveal that information to the public so that competitors can use it? It creates an artificial competitive advantage that specifically singles out disabled users and makes it so that they don't really have the same freedom of choice as users who do not need to use these tools. So it is a huge fucking deal to discuss, you know, the open and closed sourceness of gaming accessibility, and it's really concerning that this conversation has not really been opened seriously before. What implications does this have for open source software in general? Like, what does it mean for, you know, us to have, like, a requirement to develop software for a particular kind of user and, you know, have it intersect open source software? Again, I think this is a discourse that has not happened enough, and unfortunately, the Linux community is not generally very good with dealing with disabled issues and minority issues in general. It's a complicated situation, but I still think that open source is really important for accessibility and so thus worth discussing. Another problem is that many game engines will have trouble implementing accessibility models. I think the most notable one on the top of my head is Pico 8. Like, how the hell are you going to make a accessible Pico 8 game without significant amount of the resources being used to something or another? You'd either have to develop a custom... I think it can be done, don't get me wrong, but I think you'd have to develop a custom interface, and I think that some developers just need that as much space as they can. I mean, it's 32 kilobytes, you know, that's not a lot of space. That's for the ROM. I don't even know how much you can load in the RAM on the top of my head. Older engines, mods, and ROM hacks may not be able to support some models. Like, it's pretty challenging to make accessibility for older, like, game engines and older, like, emulation and stuff. And so if you make homebrew stuff, it's really hard to make that accessible. And to require accessibility in that is really not justified, in my opinion. These are niche use cases, but they're still important. And I think it's also worth considering that just because I'm saying that it's really difficult doesn't mean that it can't be explored. It would actually be really exciting to see some games in Pico 8 have some level of accessibility. What I'm more so saying is that there are technical limitations to as far as we can take these things, and I think it's reasonable to understand and empathize with developers who may be concerned about those limitations. We shouldn't be required to use big Omega machines for everything. Other stupid ass takes that I'm tired of fucking hearing. But I need to develop for every single kind of disability. No, you don't. You need to you just need to do your best, and people will appreciate whatever you do. Disabled people are mostly mad at large budget projects that make no effort to allow for minor, relatively easy changes. But what if I have to redevelop my whole engine? It is generally better to develop accessibility first thing, because it allows for not just accessibility to be easier to implement, but it also encourages a more disciplined approach to UI design. It makes your code better. It will make it much easier to manage down the project if your code ain't shit. Even if you're not able to implement accessibility first thing, an effort is always appreciated. Like, look at Discord. Look, Discord was a total fucking mess. I would not want to be on their accessibility team, because it's actually crazy what they probably have to deal with, because the software existed for like 5 years before they put any accessibility into it, especially for blind accessibility. But people really do appreciate the effort. Let's analyze a couple shitty accessibility takes to demonstrate this bullshit in action. Here's the quote. I also have this slideshow with alt text online in the description, so if you want to read it there, you can read it there. This is the quote. I get where you're coming from with the accessibility options and problems you have with certain things, but I really don't agree with your advice. Artistic vision trumps accessibility. If you want to have a fast-paced, flashy combat in your game, you should go for it, and not turn it down for people susceptible to migraines. Doesn't mean that there aren't good or bad ways to do so, but you can't accommodate everyone, so the only thing you should take into account is your creative vision. You wouldn't tell a rave club to turn off the strobe lights because someone with epilepsy just entered the club. It's on them to stay away from things they can't handle, unfortunate as it is. Okay, let's go over this. Assuming artistic vision and accessibility are mutually exclusive. When you decide to exclude accessibility intentionally, that is an artistic choice that sends a deliberate message to your audience. It is an artistic choice to decide whether or not to add accessibility. If you want to be a dick and just be like, oh, well, you get migraines? Well, fuck you, I'm not going to add reduced particle effects. You're sending an artistic message to your audience that you don't give a flying fuck, okay? So, I mean, if that's what you want to do, you can do that, but I will just call it out and say you don't give a flying fuck, so stop being like a faker poser. Assumes what the problem is instead of listening to the complaint. The issue is not the fast-paced battles, but is rather the excess visual effects, which are purely aesthetic. There's no fucking reason why you have to have 1 billion particles and shitty shader spam and render slop everywhere. That's because you wanted to have your dumb fuck artistic vision. If I really wanted to play your game, I'm still gonna fucking mod the shit out of your ugly ass fucking artistic vision because it looks like ass and shit. And I should be allowed to say that, considering how many fucking gamers are just, like, looking at, like, every Pokemon release, and they're like, oh my god, this is the ugliest slop ever. Well, guess what? Your slop is ugly to me, so yeah, all ugly fucking render slop. You can't accommodate everyone. Yep, that's that bullshit take I just pointed out in the last slide. You don't need to accommodate everyone, dumbass. It's actually not hard to implement an option that says reduced particle effects and disable shaders. It takes like 2 fucking seconds, even if you've already implemented it. Pretty much the only reason why this would take any fucking time at all is if you developed your options menu like fucking ass. But that's you being a shit developer. That's not an artistic vision. Is your artistic vision to be a yandere dev level developer? Because that's what you are. That's how the rest of the industry of developers fucking sees you, game developer amateurs. Like, come on. Let's talk about the rave club. Raves actually do often have signs warning photosensitive users of light show effects. It's because they don't want to have liability. They don't want, like, somebody to accidentally walk in and have issues and then sue them. So, like, if they warn people, then people can't sue them. But that's literally an accessibility thing in of itself. Like, they're literally telling you not to go. So, like, what is your point? Disabled people understand that some things may be inherently inaccessible and do not seek out dangerous activities intentionally like this. It's always interesting that people bring up the thing that can actually fucking kill people whenever I'm talking about something that doesn't fucking kill me, but does bring a lot of fucking misery into my life whenever I fucking encounter it. And I just think it's really interesting that instead of talking about what, you know, the problems I have, they have to make up this imaginary scenario that doesn't even fucking exist to make a point that is total horse shit. Alright, let's analyze this other shitty accessibility take. I'm not gonna read the whole thing because he's talking about a game that he's gooning over, but, like, I do want to read the main points. You do not have to play games that make you puke all day. Nobody forces you to play them. And yes, having content warnings for disabled people so an informed decision can be made is important. A lot of modern games do have issues like excessive motion blur or relying on frame gen techniques that turn the games into migraine-inducing slop. And things like that should be able to be turned down when applicable. But you simply cannot make a game, or any piece of media for that matter, that's equally accessible for everyone. Some types of accessibility features simply aren't feasible to implement without having to structure a game design around them from the ground up. Especially when it comes to games with fast-paced combat or intense bullet hell elements or experimental visuals. Okay. And at that point, yeah, artistic vision does trump accessibility. Creators shouldn't be beholden to have the limit of their expression to be sure that everyone can play it. Then he starts talking about a game that has a lot of photosensitivity effects, and he says, also, complaining about the intense movement during the Undertale Sans fight is bizarre. The fight isn't meant to be a punishment. It's meant to be overwhelming, even for abled people. I'm not a difficulty is immune to criticism person, but come on. Alright, let's talk about this piece of shit. I fucking hate you, by the way. You are a pathetic piece of shit. I actually, like, made this video because of you, because you're such a... This is why disabled people fucking hate you, okay? Alright, let's go over why this take is such shit, alright? You're failing to acknowledge that most modern games fail migraine accessibility and don't have those options, despite most older games being fine. It's actually a huge gap in the industry, and it's complained about a lot. I'm not the only person who complains about it. You can't accommodate everyone bullshit take yet again. I mean, here's the thing. Yes, you can't accommodate everyone, but you can make, small changes to your game, such as, reducing particle effects and reducing motion and things like that, to make it a nicer experience. It's not going to be the same for everyone, and that's kind of cool, honestly. We get to see, like, different kinds of ways of interacting with the game. I actually like the idea of having, like, different perspectives. Like, what does a blind version of my game tell in comparison to what a sighted version of my game tells? But the thing is that, like, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't, like, not have barf. And it seems like this person agrees that we shouldn't have barf, but they just seem really mad that I'm saying that it's, like, disabling to me. Like, why are you like this? Why? Accessibility should be designed at the beginning of the game, yes, but good software design principles make it much less challenging down the line. Like, quite frankly, if you were designing your software the way that it should be designed and, carefully, create, like, proper compartmentalization and design principles and shit where it actually, like, kind of makes sense, and, you have certain parts of the game properly isolated from others, like, it really shouldn't be that hard. It can be a pain in the ass depending on how it was built, but it probably speaks more to your crappy software stack than it does to, like, the game. And I get it. I'm not criticizing just because you have a crappy software stack. I get it. When you're in the industry, things happen. You gotta get things rolling. But, be real about it. It's not because of, your artistic vision or whatever. It's because you don't have 4 weeks to go and fucking refactor your code to support something. Okay? Like, just say it. Okay? Assuming what is possible without accessibility, with no design experience, and without consulting a consultant. Like, I don't know if this game is possibly, like, accessible or not. I haven't even looked at it. I really don't care. But, like, the thing is that this person is just deciding that it's not accessible. Like, you didn't decide whether or not we could do these things. How about we solve these problems and see what is possible? That's how things used to work before Sekiro came in and made you think that this is all artistic, right? Accessibility, as mentioned previously, is actually part of an artistic vision, and it sends a message artistically when you intentionally exclude it. You are sending a message when you say, fuck you, I'm not going to make the game more accessible. Photosensitive games can be simply given a warning before purchase to avoid issues, which is something that this person agrees with. So why are you mad? Why are you complaining? Fuck you, asshole. Also, it is very unlikely that Toby Fox wanted to intentionally injure players or make them feel sick. He just wanted to have a really hard boss fight. The problem is not how hard the battle is. The problem is how many visual effects are on there. And quite frankly, you could probably represent the collision boxes of the boss battle so that I could complete it in a way that doesn't have so many visual effects. Like, I mean, I do it all the time with, like, prototyping my own stuff, so, like, I'm sure he could do that. It's not like a game-breaking experience for me. Well, I don't think I could handle it in the actual game, but I usually have only seen it in, like film or footage, right? But, like, that was enough for me to say, yeah, I can't probably play this, but there is a possibility that changes could be made to the visual presentation to make it easier on my eyes. It's absolutely not because it's hard. I mean, it probably is too hard for me because I'm a fucking boomer, but, like, that's not the accessibility issue. The accessibility issue would not be a problem with me watching it if it were just the difficulty. Like, I can watch gamers play very difficult games. I mean, watching high-level Tetris play is some of the most exciting things to me because it's so freaking mind-blowing. So, like, it's definitely not that's the problem. The problem is just the way that it's visually presented. And I think that Toby Fox would be sympathetic to that. I did actually email him back in 2015 when Undertale first came out, and I told him that I'd be willing to do the blind accessibility model because I had experience doing it in GameMaker. And he refused on the grounds that his code was bad. And by the way, if you don't believe me, just ask him. Ask him and see if he remembers me, and tell him that I said I'm sorry for freaking out afterwards. I was an idiot, but like, I've grown since then. I understand that, you know, Toby Fox didn't understand when he first developed the game, like the possible potentials of, you know, accessibility and stuff like that. And for that, I do sympathize with him, right? You know, I sympathize with those things. And that's part of the reason why I orient my development more towards, like, what kind of open source solutions can we have? What kind of, like, you know, more, like, deterritorialized versions can we have? Like, we don't have to have everything in a game, right? What would be a really exciting accomplishment is, even if it's been done independently, it would be fun to figure out in my own way how to make, you know, Undertale more blind accessible. And, you know, just to kind of, like, you know, wrap that up, you know? And I just think it's funny that this person brings that up because, like, I actually had that conversation with Toby Fox 10 years ago. And yeah, it's just kind of funny because I've been thinking about it a lot because of the Heartbound video, and it's kind of given me some warm feelings because I really appreciate Undertale a lot more now than I did back then. And yeah, just an awful take, horrible take. I hate you. So yeah, that's just everything I had to say about that on the top of my head. I'm sure there's more I can say if you want to ask questions or, you know, start a discourse or something on the subject. So feel free to talk.